The distress beacon from the Calorian diplomatic vessel cuts through the silence of deep space. The message is simple but desperate. Vessel compromised. Multiple casualties. Hostile forces. Request immediate assistance. The signal reaches dozens of ships across multiple species, but most determine the risk too great. Located in a contested sector near a gravitational anomaly, the rescue would be nearly impossible. The Galactic Concorde logs the signal but deems immediate intervention impractical. Only one vessel changes course immediately. The human merchant ship Tenacity, captained by former Earth Special Forces operative Adrienne Carter and her crew of retired military specialists. The Tenacity's engines flare bright against the darkness as they accelerate toward danger, while other ships turn away. Captain Carter studied the distress signal for the 5th time, her weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the command console. The coordinates placed the Calorian vessel dangerously close to the Veil Nebula's gravity well, a location no reasonable captain would venture near without absolute necessity. Analysis complete, announced the ship's AI in its characteristic neutral tone. Probability of successful rescue, 23%. Probability of Tenacity sustaining critical damage, 67%. Probability of total loss of vessel and crew. That's enough, Carter interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite strike teams through impossible missions. Plot the fastest course. The bridge fell silent. First Officer Liu, a former tactical coordinator with scars that told stories he never volunteered, exchanged glances with navigation specialist Cortez. Captain, Liu began carefully. Concorde protocols explicitly forbid intervention in crisis situations where success probability falls below 40%. Carter's lips curved into a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Good thing we're a merchant vessel, then. Concorde protocols are merely suggestions. She rose from her chair, her movements fluid despite the old combat injuries that ached when they approached gravitational disturbances. The holographic display expanded, revealing the treacherous approach they would need to navigate: radiation storms, debris fields, and unpredictable gravity fluctuations that made the route a navigator's nightmare. The Calorians are diplomats, not warriors, she continued, voice softening slightly. Whoever attacked them knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random. Cortez leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the navigation interface. Even if we reach them, extraction will be nearly impossible. The gravitational shear alone could tear our hull apart during acceleration. Then we'll need to be creative, Carter replied. Alert the crew. Full tactical briefing in 10 minutes. As the bridge officers dispersed to their stations, Carter activated her personal comm channel. Weber, I need every ounce of power those engines can give us. The engineer's voice crackled through the speaker. Already bypassing the safety regulators, Captain. We'll be running hot. Might cook us all, but we'll get there fast. Carter nodded to herself. Shaw, what's our weapon status? A deeper voice responded, tinged with the slight electronic resonance of neural augmentation. Official manifest shows mining charges and debris clearance tools. Unofficially, I've got enough firepower to start a small war. Good. We might need to finish one. She paused. Wong Nakamura, prepare for casualties. Unknown number, unknown condition. Acknowledgements came through in quick succession. Carter closed the channel and turned to the viewport, watching as stars began to blur with their increasing velocity. The Tenacity had begun life as a standard Horizon-class transport vessel, but after 5 years under her command, very little remained standard about it. The Galactic Concorde classified humans as a developing species with concerning behavioral patterns. Their psychological evaluations labeled humanity's risk assessment capabilities as evolutionarily stunted, their tendency toward intervention in crisis situations as pathologically altruistic, and their capacity for improvisation under duress as dangerously unpredictable. Carter considered these assessments as her ship accelerated toward what most species would consider certain death. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps there was something fundamentally broken in human psychology that made them rush toward danger rather than away from it. The alert system chimed, warning of the first radiation belt approaching. Carter strapped herself into her command chair as the ship began to shudder. Crossing radiation threshold in 30 seconds, Cordes announced, her voice steady despite the danger. All hands, secure for turbulence, Carter ordered through the ship-wide comm. She allowed herself one last look at the distress signal's coordinates. Something about the attack pattern felt wrong. The Calorians were respected neutral parties, their diplomatic status protected by treaties spanning 17 systems. Attacking them wasn't just criminal, it was suicidal from a political standpoint. Unless someone wanted something specific, something worth the consequences. The Tenacity plunged into the radiation storm, its hull groaning under the assault of particles moving at near-relativistic speeds. They were committed now. The most dangerous humans in the sector were coming to the rescue, whether the universe was ready for them or not. Captain Carter's voice echoes through the ship's intercom, awakening her uniquely qualified crew. Darius Shaw, his eyes glinting with neural augmentations that process battlefield data faster than any combat computer, begins mapping approach vectors. Ren Nakamura flexes his synthetic limbs, testing the stealth systems integrated with his modified nervous system. Dr. Eliza Wong, humming to herself, unpacks xenobiological compounds considered too experimental by Concord standards. Engineer Klaus Weber's fingers dance across displays, converting mining equipment into defense systems with elegant efficiency. Through the viewports, space itself seems to distort as the Tenacity pushes its engines beyond recommended parameters. They call us dangerous, Carter tells her crew as they prepare. Today, let's prove them right. The tactical briefing room of the Tenacity had never been designed for military operations. Once a standard cargo planning space, it now featured a holographic projection table salvaged from a decommissioned destroyer and computing systems that would make Concord intelligence officers raise their eyebrows. Carter stood at the head of the table as her core team filed in. Each of them carried the unmistakable air of someone who had seen too much combat to ever fully return to civilian life. Situation report. She began without preamble as the door sealed behind them. Calorian diplomatic vessel, Harmonious Discourse, issued a critical distress call 53 minutes ago. Last transmission indicated multiple boarders, significant casualties, and hostile intent. The holographic display flared to life, showing the vessel's last known coordinates and the treacherous approach route the Tenacity would need to navigate. Shaw leaned forward, his augmented eyes scanning the tactical display with inhuman speed. The neural interfaces embedded along his temples pulsed with soft blue light, processing combat scenarios faster than he could verbalize them. 7 ships in formation around the Calorian vessel, he noted, his voice carrying the slight metallic undertone common to those with extensive neural modifications. Attack pattern indicates Vrexian methodology, precision disabling shots to engines and communication arrays. Dr. Wong pushed her spectacles higher on her nose, studying the medical telemetry data streaming alongside the tactical display. Though her appearance suggested a mild-mannered academic, the subtle scaring along her hands told of field medicine performed under fire. Calorian physiology is resilient to decompression and radiation, she observed, but they're highly susceptible to blunt force trauma. If the boarders are using standard Vrexian tactics, they're efficient butchers, Nakamura finished for her. His synthetic hands flexed unconsciously, the micro-servos whirring almost inaudibly. Half his body had been replaced after an extraction mission went catastrophically wrong. The Concord Medical Board had declared him excessively enhanced and revoked his service clearance. Their loss had been Carter's gain. Weber, who had joined the briefing via holographic projection from engineering, appeared with grease smudges across his forehead. Captain, I've redirected power from non-essential systems to shields and engines. We're running at 137% of rated capacity. Time until we burn out, Carter asked pragmatically. Weber's laugh was short and sharp. If we're still flying in 8 hours, I'll be very surprised at my own brilliance. Carter nodded, appreciating the honesty. Then we have less than 8 hours to reach the Calorians, neutralize the threat, and extract the survivors. The crew exchanged glances, not of doubt, but of shared understanding. This was the kind of impossible timeline they had all faced before, in different uniforms and under different banners. Concord peacekeeping forces will respond eventually, Liu noted from his position near the door. But their nearest patrol is at least 26 hours out, and they'll arrive with committee-approved tactics and rules of engagement, Shaw added, not bothering to hide his disdain. By then, there won't be anything left to save. Carter straightened, studying each member of her crew. They were outcasts in the wider galactic community, too unpredictable, too willing to take risks, too human by the standards of species that had evolved beyond the survival instincts that still drove Earth's children among the stars. "We're going in fast and hot," she said. "Standard approach won't work with those gravity distortions. Navigation will need to be manual for the final approach." "Suicide run," Cordes remarked without inflection from her station at navigation. "Only if we die," Carter countered with the ghost of a smile. "Shaw, I want tactical options that the Vrexians won't expect. Wong, prepare for tridge. Nakamura, you're our boarding specialist. I need infiltration strategies. Weber, keep this ship together with whatever you've got." As her crew dispersed to their stations, Carter remained at the tactical display. The Calorian vessel's life signs were fading with each passing minute. Whatever the Vrexians wanted, they were willing to massacre diplomats to get it. "They call us dangerous," she murmured to herself as the tenacity accelerated toward the impossible rescue. "Today, let's prove them right." The tenacity emerges from its emergency jump to find the diplomatic vessel surrounded by unmarked ships, bearing the distinct angular design of Vrexian marauders. On the main screen, the Calorian ship displays significant damage, with hull breaches across its elegant frame. The marauders, detecting the human vessel, transmit a warning. This claim is established. Depart or join the salvage. Captain Carter responds with something unexpected: detailed schematics of the Vrexian flagship's reactor vulnerabilities, along with timestamps estimating how quickly her team could exploit them. The communication officer on the Vrexian ship visibly recoils at the response. "Humans," he whispers to his commander. "They don't negotiate like normal people." The tenacity shuddered violently as it exited the emergency jump. Alarms blared across every deck as the ship's superstructure groaned under forces it was never designed to endure. On the bridge, navigation screens flickered with error messages before stabilizing. The acrid smell of overheated circuitry filled the air. "Jump complete," Cortez announced, her voice tight as she fought the manual controls. "Position confirmed. We're within visual range of the Calorian vessel." Carter gripped the command chair as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. "Damage report. Primary shield generator offline." Weber's voice came through, punctuated by the sound of emergency repair systems. "Hull integrity at 78%. Engine 3 is overheating, but I've got it contained for now." Leo activated the main view screen, revealing the scene before them. The Calorian diplomatic vessel, Harmonious Discourse, hung suspended against the backdrop of swirling nebula gases. Once a thing of beauty with its characteristic flowing lines and crystalline sensor arrays, it now bore the unmistakable marks of a violent assault. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space, and its propulsion nacelles had been precisely targeted to prevent escape. Surrounding it like predators around wounded prey were 7 ships of Vrexian design. Angular, utilitarian vessels built for efficiency rather than aesthetics. Their weapons remained powered, occasionally firing precision shots to disable any systems the Calorians might try to bring back online. "Life signs?" Carter asked, her eyes never leaving the screen. Wong consulted her medical scanners. "Faint but present. I'm detecting 23 Calorian biosignatures clustered in what appears to be your central diplomatic chamber. Multiple trauma patterns consistent with physical assault rather than weapons fire. They're taking prisoners," Shaw observed grimly. The Vrexians want something specific. The communications array chimed, indicating an incoming transmission. Liu opened the channel, and a Vrexian face appeared on screen. Like all their species, the commander featured a rigid exoskeletal cranium and compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling patterns. Unidentified vessel, the Vrexians stated in the formal, clipped cadence of their species. This claim is established. Depart or join the salvage. Carter stepped forward, deliberately positioning herself in the transmission frame. This is Captain Adrienne Carter of the merchant vessel Tenacity. We're responding to a distress call from a diplomatic ship under Concord protection. The Vrexian's mandibles clicked in what translated as dismissive amusement. Concord protection is theoretical. Our presence is actual. Final warning. Depart immediately. Carter nodded to Shaw, who transmitted a data packet through the open channel. Before you make threats, Commander, you might want to review what we just sent you. On the Vrexian bridge, visible behind their commander, a subordinate officer studied the incoming data. His compound eyes widened as the information resolved on his screen. Captain, the officer whispered to his commander, loud enough for the still-open channel to capture, they've transmitted detailed schematics of our reactor shielding, with targeting solutions and efficiency estimates. The Vrexian commander turned to view the data himself, mandibles twitching in what humans have learned to recognize as surprise. Carter smiled thinly. As you can see, Commander, we've identified 7 critical vulnerabilities in your flagship's reactor containment system. My tactical officer estimates we could exploit all of them in under 12 minutes. The resulting cascade failure would be instructive to witness, from a safe distance, of course. The bridge of the Vrexian vessel fell silent. Their tactical doctrine had no protocol for this approach. Threats were met with counter-threats, violence with violence, not with targeted technical analysis and calm statements of capability. Humans, the communications officer whispered to his commander, forgetting the open channel, they don't negotiate like normal people. Carter crossed her arms. We have no quarrel with the Vrexian marauders, Commander. Our only interest is the diplomatic vessel and its crew. You have 2 minutes to begin withdrawal before we demonstrate our seriousness. The Vrexian commander's compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting that had suddenly activated on his bridge. Strategic calculations raced behind those alien orbs, weighing the unexpected threat against their mission parameters. 2 minutes, Carter repeated softly. Your time starts now. Ren Nakamura launches from the Tenacity in a pod barely larger than his body, its surface absorbing all sensing technology. The pod passes between Vrexian patrol routes, calculated by Shaw to be precisely 7 seconds apart. Inside the Calorian vessel, survivors huddle behind makeshift barricades, their normally blue skin pale with fear. A young Calorian scientist clutches a container humming with ancient energy. The door to their sanctuary melts under Vrexian cutting tools, and the survivors prepare for the end, only to watch their attackers collapse from behind. Nakamura stands in the doorway, his expression calm despite the chaos he's left in his wake. The most dangerous human you'll ever meet, he introduces himself with unexpected gentleness, is the one who came to take you home. The tension on the Tenacity's bridge dissolved into focused activity as the Vrexian's flagship began a slow lateral movement away from the Calorian vessel. Not a full retreat, but enough of a concession to buy time. The repositioning, not withdrawing, Shaw observed, his augmented eyes tracking minute thruster adjustments, buying time to assess our capabilities. Carter nodded. Then we use that time. Nakamura, you're up. In the launch bay, Ren Nakamura performed final checks on his insertion pod. Unlike standard escape pods, this custom-built stealth unit resembled nothing so much as a coffin lined with technology. Its outer hull was coated with light-absorbing metamaterials that rendered it nearly invisible to standard sensors. All systems nominal, he reported through his Neuralink as the pod sealed around him. His synthetic limbs locked into interface ports, giving him direct control over the pod's minimal propulsion. Weber's voice came through the comm. Remember, the stealth system only works if you maintain minimal power usage. One burst of thrust, then ballistic trajectory. No course corrections unless absolutely necessary. I've done this before, Nakamura replied dryly. On Kelthus Prime, with actual military hardware shooting at me. And you lost 3 limbs doing it. Wong cut in, her medical officer's concern evident. Nakamura flexed his synthetic hand, watching the articulated metal fingers move with perfect precision. Better replacements than the originals. Launching now. The pod ejected silently from a concealed port on the Tenacity's underside. One brief propulsion burst sent it on a calculated trajectory toward the Calorian vessel. Then all systems except life support went dormant. Nakamura's breathing slowed to a practiced meditation rhythm that reduced his biosignature to near undetectable levels. On the Tenacity's bridge, Carter watched through satellite tracking as the pod slipped between Vrexian patrol routes. Shaw had calculated their movements to exploit a 7-second gap between sensor sweeps, a margin so narrow that most species would consider it impossible to navigate reliably. Pod has cleared the first patrol line, Liu reported tensely. Second line approaching in 30 seconds. Status of the Calorian survivors? Carter asked, keeping her voice even despite the risks her infiltration specialist was taking. Wong studied her medical scanners with a frown. Vital signs increasingly erratic. The Vrexians are pushing inward toward the central chamber. They'll reach the survivors in approximately 12 minutes. Inside the pod, Nakamura floated in perfect stillness, feeling the subtle vibrations of passing Vrexian ships through his enhanced senses. The pod's trajectory carried it through the debris field surrounding the damaged Calorian vessel, using the wreckage as additional camouflage. A proximity alert flashed silently across his neural interface, a Vrexian patrol craft passing less than 20 meters away. Nakamura didn't flinch, didn't breathe, trusting in Shaw's calculations and the pod's stealth technology. The moment passed. The pod continued its silent approach to a hull breach near the Calorian vessel's diplomatic section. Inside the harmonious discourse, 23 survivors huddled behind hastily constructed barricades in what had once been an elegant reception chamber. Ambassador Talon, senior diplomat of the Calorian Consortium, pressed a compress against the facial injuries of a junior attaché. The young Calorian scientist, Maris, clutched a cylindrical container that hummed with an energy signature older than any civilization in the sector. "They're coming through," whispered the vessel's security chief, one of only 3 armed personnel aboard the diplomatic ship. The Calorians had evolved as consensus builders, their biology and psychology optimized for empathy and negotiation rather than conflict. The massive doors to their sanctuary began to glow red as Vrexian cutting tools melted through the metal. Sparks showered onto the floor as the circle of molten material widened. Ambassador Talon stood tall before his people. "Remember our oath of service. Dignity until the end." The central section of the door crashed inward. Vrexian soldiers raised their weapons, only to freeze in confusion. Behind them, their advance team lay crumpled on the deck in unnatural positions. A figure stepped through the smoke, smaller than the Vrexians, moving with uncanny fluidity. The intruder's right arm terminated in what appeared to be a compact sonic disruptor rather than hand. The remaining Vrexians spun to confront the new threat, but with inhuman speed, the intruder had already closed the distance. The first Vrexian dropped from a precision strike to nerve clusters beneath its exoskeleton. The second fired wildly, missing as the human seemed to flow around the energy blast like water. In seconds, the assault team lay incapacitated. The human stood in the doorway, calmly retracting the weapon system back into his forearm, revealing a synthetic hand beneath. "The most dangerous human you'll ever meet," Nakamura introduced himself to the stunned Calorians, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the violence he just inflicted, "is the one who came to take you home." As Dr. Wong treats the injured Calorians aboard the Tenacity, Ambassador Talon reveals the truth about their mission. "This isn't just an artifact. the ambassador explains, revealing a crystalline device pulsing with internal light. It's a key to the predecessor network, defense systems spanning 17 sectors. The device projects a holographic map showing forgotten installations that could shield worlds or destroy them. The hegemony hired the Marauders to acquire it. With it, they could dominate known space. Carter studies the map, seeing not just strategic value but the lives that would be lost if it fell into the wrong hands. The Concord would establish a committee to study this problem, Wong observes dryly. Humans establish solutions instead. The extraction had been chaotic but effective. With Nakamura securing an evacuation route through the Calorian vessel's maintenance tunnels, Carter had deployed Shaw and a security team to create a diversion that drew Vrexian forces away from the escape path. Weber had reconfigured the Tenacity's cargo bay into a makeshift medical facility, where Dr. Wong now moved efficiently among the injured Calorians. Compound fracture of the secondary respiratory membrane, Wong murmured as she treated Ambassador Talon. Her hands worked with practiced precision, applying a synthetic sealant to the Calorian's uniquely structured breathing apparatus. You're fortunate. Another few centimeters and the damage would have been irreparable. The ambassador's skin shifted through subtle blue hues, the Calorian equivalent of a pained smile. Fortune had little to do with it, Doctor. The Vrexians were precise in their methods. They damaged us enough to ensure compliance, but preserved those they believed held information. Carter approached, having completed a sweep of the ship's defenses. The Tenacity maintained a precarious position at the edge of the gravitational anomaly, using the distortions to partially shield them from Vrexian sensors. It wouldn't fool them for long. The Vrexians have fallen back to regroup, she informed the ambassador. We've bought maybe 30 minutes before they try again. I need to know what they want badly enough to attack a diplomatic vessel. Talon exchanged glances with the young scientist, Maris, who clutched the cylindrical container with unwavering vigilance despite her injuries. After a moment of silent communication, the subtle skin color shifts that supplemented Calorian verbal language, the ambassador nodded. We were returning from exploring ruins in the Cygnus Void, Talon explained, his voice gaining strength as Wong's treatments took effect. Remnants of the predecessor civilization, what we found was unexpected. Maris stepped forward, finally loosening her grip on the container. With reverent movements, she twisted the top section, causing intricate patterns along its surface to realign. The container opened with a soft hiss of preserved atmosphere, revealing a crystalline device approximately the size of a human hand. This isn't just an artifact, Talon continued as the device began to pulse with internal light, casting geometric shadows across the medical bay. It's a key to the predecessor network, defense systems spanning 17 sectors. The device activated fully, projecting a holographic map into the air above it. Stellate patterns connected various points across recognizable star clusters, highlighting structures hidden in asteroid fields, embedded in gas giants, and orbiting dead stars. These installations have remained dormant for millennia, Maris explained, her scientific training evident in her precise terminology. Our analysis suggests they formed an integrated defense network capable of redirecting stellar energy to create impenetrable shields or devastating weapons. Carter studied the map with a strategist's eye, seeing not just the tactical value, but the billions of lives that would become pawns if such power fell into the wrong hands. The hegemony learned of our discovery, Talon said, his colors darkening with concern. They hired the Marauders to intercept us before we could reach Concord space. The hegemony? Liu asked from his position by the door. They maintained peaceful relations with the Concord. Officially, Shaw interjected, his augmented eyes scanning the projected installation locations and committing them to his enhanced memory. Unofficially, they've been expanding their influence through proxy forces for decades. With this network, they could dominate known space, Carter finished grimly, holding entire systems hostage. Wong finished treating another Calorian before adding, the Concord would establish a committee to study this problem. They debate jurisdiction, historical preservation ethics, and non-interventionist protocols until the hegemony had already activated the network. Carter's expression hardened as she made a decision. What's your assessment of the key's stability during transit, Maris? Can it withstand high maneuvers? The young scientist blinked in surprise at the directness of the question. Yes, but what are you planning? The Vrexians will return in greater numbers, Carter explained, and they'll be ready for our previous tactics. We need to reach Concord space, but not through conventional routes. Ambassador Talon's colors shifted to patterns indicating alarm. What alternative could possibly exist? The anomaly is impassable. Carter exchanged looks with her crew, the slight nods of people who had survived impossible situations through unconventional thinking. Humans establish solutions where others see only problems, she stated with quiet confidence. And sometimes, the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking. Captain Carter splits her forces in a move that makes the Calorians nervous. Never divide your strength, Ambassador Talon protests. That's conventional wisdom, Carter agrees, which makes it perfectly predictable. Weber launches cargo drones modified with radiation signatures mimicking escape pods, drawing half the Vrexian forces away. Shaw leads a counterattack against the boarders still inside the diplomatic vessel, using disorientation tactics that exploit the Vrexians' structured thinking patterns. From the command deck, Carter watches the Marauders respond exactly as predicted. Your species embraces chaos, Talon observes. Not chaos, Carter corrects. Complexity. There's a difference between disorder and patterns too intricate for enemies to recognize. The bridge of the Tenacity had transformed into a war room. Holographic displays showed the approaching Vrexian vessels, no longer 7 but 12 ships forming a blockade pattern that would trap them against the gravitational anomaly. They've called for reinforcements, Liu reported, monitoring communications. Hegemony encryption patterns confirmed on their transmissions. These aren't just random marauders. Carter stood before the tactical display, her mind calculating possibilities while the rest of her crew and the Calorian leadership awaited her decision. The conventional approach would be to consolidate their forces, make a stand, and hope for Concord reinforcements that would arrive too late. Carter had never been conventional. We're splitting our forces, she announced, tracing lines across the display to indicate movement patterns. Ambassador Talon's skin rippled with alarm patterns. Captain, with respect to your expertise, dividing our strength goes against every strategic principle in the Concord manual. Never divide your strength, the ambassador continued, quoting from memory. It allows a superior force to defeat each segment in detail. Carter nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. That's conventional wisdom, ambassador, which makes it perfectly predictable. The Vrexians will be expecting us to make a unified defensive stand or a desperate push through their weakest point. She expanded the tactical display to show the cargo bay, where Weber was already at work. Engineer Weber has modified our cargo drones with radiation signatures that will mimic escape pods carrying Calorian life signs. We'll launch them on trajectories away from the anomaly. Shaw's augmented eyes narrowed as he followed her strategy. The Vrexians will split their forces to pursue what they believe are escaping targets carrying the artifact. While half our actual forces return to the Calorian vessel, Carter continued. The Vrexians left boarding parties aboard to continue searching for the artifact. They won't expect us to go back. The Calorian security chief, his arm in a medical stabilizer, looked perplexed. Return to our vessel? But we've evacuated everyone. Not everyone, Nakamura corrected quietly. I counted at least 6 Calorian life signs in separate detention areas. The Vrexians are interrogating them. The revelation sent a wave of color changes rippling through the assembled Calorians. Ambassador Talon straightened, his diplomatic reserve cracking. We must recover them. Immediately. Shaw will lead the rescue team, Carter confirmed, with Nakamura and 4 security personnel. They'll employ disorientation tactics designed specifically for Vrexian psychology. Shaw brought up a secondary display showing neural response patterns. Vrexians evolved as hive-minded colonial organisms. Their psychology remains highly structured, with difficulty processing multiple threat vectors simultaneously. We'll exploit that. From the engineering section, Weber's voice came through the comm. Drones ready for deployment, Captain. I've given them randomized evasion programs that should keep the Vrexians chasing shadows for at least 40 minutes. And the tenacity? Liu asked the question everyone was thinking. What will we be doing while the drones and rescue team draw their attention? Carter's expression hardened with resolve. We'll be making final preparations for our passage through the anomaly. A stunned silence fell across the bridge. Even the human crew exchanged concerned glances. Captain, Corditz finally spoke from navigation. The anomaly's gravitational shear would tear apart any vessel attempting direct passage. The simulation models give us zero probability of survival. Conventional simulation models, Carter corrected. Weber has other ideas. On cue, the engineer's face appeared on a side display, streaked with lubricant and radiating the particular brand of manic energy that accompanied his most brilliant and terrifying innovations. I've reconfigured our shield generators to project asymmetric envelopes, Weber explained, gesturing to diagrams that only he fully understood. Instead of resisting the gravitational forces, we'll use them to slingshot us through the anomaly's least destructive path. From the command deck, Carter watched as the first wave of cargo drones launched, their signatures immediately drawing pursuit from 6 Vrexian vessels. Shaw's team departed moments later, using the distraction to slip back aboard the damaged Calorian ship. Ambassador Talon observed the unfolding strategy with growing fascination, his skin shifting to colors indicating deep contemplation. Your species embraces chaos, he remarked, watching the Marauders respond exactly as Carter had predicted. Not chaos, Carter corrected gently. Complexity. There's a difference between disorder and patterns too intricate for enemies to recognize. With the surviving Calorians aboard and the artifacts secured, the tenacity prepares to escape. The Vrexian flagship moves to block their path, its weapons charging. Carter's plan unfolds in synchronized precision. Shaw interfaces with targeting systems, his augmented reflexes finding firing solutions that computers reject as impossible. Nakamura volunteers for a mission to disable the Vrexian engines, knowing the radiation exposure exceeds safety parameters. Weber converts the ship's energy reserves to create a momentary shield envelope. Most shockingly to the Calorians, Carter plots a course through the gravitational anomaly that no simulation says they can survive. As warning systems flash across every console, Ambassador Talon grips Carter's arm. Why risk everything? Carter's smile carries equal parts determination and calculation. Because sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking. Time compressed around them as multiple operations converge toward a single critical moment. Shaw's rescue team returned to the tenacity with the 6 captive Calorians, their boarding shuttle barely escaping as the Vrexians realized they'd been deceived. The decoy drones had led half the enemy fleet on a futile chase into the nearby nebula, but the deception wouldn't hold much longer. On the bridge, Carter watched as the remaining Vrexian vessels regrouped, their flagship taking point position to block the most obvious escape vector. All rescue personnel aboard and in medical, Liu reported. Shaw's team sustained injuries, but nothing critical. Carter nodded. Status of the Vrexian pursuit force. They've realized the deception, Corditz replied from navigation. Estimate 8 minutes before they return to reinforce the blockade. The tactical display showed their predicament in stark detail. 6 Vrexian vessels formed a barrier between them and open space. Behind them loomed the gravitational anomaly, its swirling energies visibly distorting the fabric of space itself. Weber, status on the shield modifications? Carter asked, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. The engineer's response came through between static bursts. Theoretical models show a 32% chance of maintaining structural integrity through the anomaly. That's assuming perfect timing on the shield modulation sequence. And who's handling that sequence? Carter asked, already knowing the answer. Only way is manual interface, Weber replied. I'll be in the shield generator room. If the timing's off by even milliseconds, the gravitational shear will tear us apart. Ambassador Talon approached the command station, his injuries treated but his movements still careful. Captain, I'm receiving reports that your tactical officer is attempting something concerning. Carter turned to the weapons station where Shaw sat rigidly upright, neural interface cables connected directly to his augmentation ports. His eyes had rolled back, showing only whites as his enhanced nervous system communicated directly with the Tenacity's targeting systems. Shaw is calculating firing solutions that conventional computers can't process, Carter explained. By interfacing directly, he can anticipate the Vrexians' evasive patterns before they make them. But the neural load, Talon protested, his skin shifting to colors of alarm. Your medical officer informed me that such deep integration risks permanent brain damage. He's aware, Carter replied simply. Across the ship, similar scenes of calculated risk unfolded. Nakamura prepared for a stealth insertion onto the Vrexian flagship, a mission to disable their engines long enough for the Tenacity to attempt its escape. The radiation exposure alone exceeded safe parameters by factors the Calorians found horrifying. In engineering, Weber converted emergency power reserves to reinforce the shield generators, bypassing safety interlocks designed to prevent exactly the kind of overload he was now intentionally creating. The flagship is targeting our engines, Liu announced as warning indicators flashed across his console. They're attempting to disable rather than destroy us. They still want the artifact. Carter's hands moved across the command interface, finalizing the sequence she had been preparing. A course plotted directly into the heart of the anomaly appeared on the main view screen, a swirling path that curved through the gravitational distortion in ways that defied conventional navigation. Warning systems flashed red across every console. The ship's AI calculated their survival probability at near 0%, repeatedly flagging the course as unsurvivable. Ambassador Talon stared at the plotted trajectory in disbelief. No vessel has ever survived passage through an anomaly of this magnitude. The Concord has classified it as a navigational impossibility. Impossibility is just a challenge humans haven't solved yet, Carter replied, initiating the sequence that would commit them to this course. As the Tenacity's engines powered up, Ambassador Talon gripped Carter's arm. His skin rippled with patterns indicating both fear and fascination. Why risk everything? He asked, genuinely seeking to understand the human mindset that would gamble so many lives on such slim odds. Carter's smile carried equal parts determination and calculation, because sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking. She activated the ship-wide comm. All hands, secure for extreme gravitational distortion. This is going to get rough. The Tenacity surged forward, Shaw's impossible targeting calculations allowing their minimal weapons to strike with surgical precision at the Vrexian vessels attempting to intercept them. Behind them, Nakamura's insertion had succeeded. The flagship's engines flared and died as planned. Before them lay the swirling maw of the anomaly, a tier in space that conventional wisdom said would be their tomb. The humans aboard the Tenacity faced it without flinching. The Tenacity emerges from the gravitational anomaly, systems failing but crew intact. The Vrexian pursuit ships never emerge. As emergency repairs commence, a Concord peacekeeping fleet finally arrives with overwhelming force but too late to matter. In the Concord flagship's conference room, officials begin listing regulation violations until Ambassador Talon interrupts with unexpected passion. These humans didn't just save lives, they prevented a war. The artifact, now safely contained, will be studied by a joint Calorian-human research team, combining caution with innovation. As the formal proceedings conclude, Talon approaches Carter privately. The Concord calls humans dangerous because you take risks others won't consider. But we understand now, in a universe of threats beyond imagination, The ability to think beyond conventional boundaries isn't recklessness. The ambassador's eyes reflect newfound respect. It might be the greatest strength any species can offer. The passage through the anomaly defied description. Reality itself seemed to distort as gravitational forces pulled the tenacity in directions that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The ship's superstructure groaned under pressures it was never designed to withstand. In engineering, Weber danced between failing systems, manually adjusting shield harmonics to match the rapidly shifting gravitational waves. On the bridge, crew members strapped into emergency harnesses as inertial dampeners failed intermittently. Quartz remained locked in concentration at navigation, making micro-adjustments to their trajectory that meant the difference between survival and disintegration. The Calorians, huddled in the ship's core where structural integrity was strongest, witnessed humanity's response to imminent death, not with panic or resignation, but with focused problem-solving and grim determination. When the tenacity finally erupted from the other side of the anomaly, it was a vessel on the edge of collapse. Hull breaches across multiple decks were sealed by emergency force fields. Power fluctuated wildly as damaged reactors struggled to maintain critical systems. But they were alive, and they were beyond the Vrexian blockade. "Damage report," Carter called out, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead as emergency lighting bathed the bridge in red. Liu scanned the failing systems. Life support at 60% capacity, engines at minimal function, weapons offline, communications severely limited. "The Vrexians?" Carter asked. Quartus checked the long-range sensors. No pursuit detected. They didn't follow us through. A grim silence acknowledged the fate of any vessels that might have attempted to chase them through the anomaly without Weber's shield modifications and Carter's impossible navigation calculations. "Begin emergency repairs," Carter ordered. "Priority to life support and communications. We need to alert the Concord about the hegemony's involvement." Hours later, as the Tenacity's crew worked to stabilize their damaged vessel, sensors detected the approach of multiple ships. The distinctive configuration of Concord peacekeepers, an entire fleet of them, arriving with overwhelming force but far too late to have made any difference in the crisis. The Concord flagship established communications, and soon Carter found herself in a sterile conference room aboard the massive vessel. Arrayed before her were Concord officials of multiple species, their expressions ranging from skepticism to open hostility. "Captain Carter," began the senior official, a Thoraxian whose exoskeleton bore the markings of high administrative rank, "you stand accused of violating 17 separate Concord protocols, including unauthorized intervention in a sovereign crisis, illegal weapons deployment, and reckless endangerment of civilian lives." Carter remained standing at parade rest, her expression neutral as the list of violations continued. "Furthermore, your modification of a civilian vessel for military purposes constitutes..." Enough. The voice that interrupted belonged to Ambassador Talon, who entered the chamber with unexpected vigor given his recent injuries. His skin rippled with colors that those familiar with Calorian emotional displays recognized as righteous indignation. These humans didn't just save lives, they prevented a war. The ambassador's voice carried the full weight of his diplomatic authority. While the Concord debated jurisdiction and protocol, Captain Carter and her crew acted decisively against a hegemony-black operation that would have shifted the balance of power across known space. Murmurs spread through the assembled officials as Talon revealed the discovery of the predecessor artifact and the hegemony's attempts to acquire it through proxy forces. The subsequent debriefing lasted hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence provided by the rescued Calorians, combined with data captured from the Vrexian vessels, painted an undeniable picture of hegemony aggression that the Concord could not ignore. As the formal proceedings concluded, the artifact was transferred to a secure Concord facility, with an agreement that it would be studied by a joint Calorian human research team, combining caution with innovation in ways neither culture could achieve alone. Ambassador Talon approached Carter privately, as she prepared to return to her ship, which now bore the scars of their impossible journey. The Concord calls humans dangerous because you take risks others won't consider, the ambassador said quietly. But we understand now, in a universe of threats beyond imagination, the ability to think beyond conventional boundaries isn't recklessness. The ambassador's eyes reflected newfound respect. It might be the greatest strength any species can offer. The universe needs dangerous humans, Captain Carter. It just didn't know it until now. Carter allowed herself a genuine smile, not the tactical expression she used in negotiations, but one of simple human connection. We're not so different, Ambassador. We both want the same thing in the end, a universe where diplomats like you can do your work without needing people like us. Until then? Talon asked. Until then, Carter replied, glancing toward her waiting crew, we'll answer the next urgent rescue request. Someone has to.